Well, I think we'll always be fighting racism. Race is one of the core parts of our identity, and it's one of the ways that we separate one from another. It's something actually that babies, it's one of the first things that they actually are able to distinguish is different colors rather than different genders, for example. So I think that racism is something that we will fight across the globe for many years to come. And particularly in Europe, I think that there is a different relationship to race in relation to the US. So in Europe, we still are looking for the right vocabulary and for the courage to talk about difference and the courage to really address racism for what it is. And in the US, we are a little bit more able to talk about it because the US has been built on immigrants, on immigration streams throughout the history of the United States, while Europe has a fairly recent stream of immigrants. So for so long, Europe was fairly homogenous, or the different European countries were. But only in the past 30 to 40 years, we really have seen an explosion of different ethnicities coming into the into Europe. So it's a fairly recent debate that we still have to become comfortable with, and I think it will take a little while before we're really are able to do that. So I really think that this conference is a good opportunity to talk about race and to bring it to the foreground and talk about ethnicity and say what does that mean to us, and to really push ourselves a little bit beyond our comfort zone of what we're used to talking about ethnicity. We like to be. I think one of the challenges, particularly in Europe, is that we like to be ethnicity blind, race blind, and not talk about it and say we're all French or we're all Dutch or we're all Swedish. But really, we're not. We're all different ethnicities in a country, and so the first step is to really become comfortable talking about difference in general. To me, it means inclusion. Particularly in Europe, I think we're still talking a lot about diversity, and in the US as well. But we need to move from diversity to inclusion. So to me, a society that is equal, that is really promoting well-being for everyone, means that everybody should be included and everybody's voices should be at the table. So what we like to say sometimes is that diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusion is being asked to dance. And that means participating, and not just the dance that is already being danced, but participating, creating a new choreography, and being able to be at the table to make your voices heard, and to create a society that it reflects the needs and interests of most people. So I think we need to move the debate from the numbers of different people to how do we relate to each other, and how do we treat each other with respect. And understand, to me, that also really means understanding who it is that you're bringing to the table. So it's not just how do we deal with other people, but it's also who are you? Do you understand who you are, what your identity is, what your beliefs are, what your view is onto the world, and how that impacts the way that you relate to others. So that means really practice conscious awareness of yourself and manage any prejudices or opinions you might have so that you can really relate to each other from someone else's point of view and not just your own. Sure. So, like I said, I think we really should work towards inclusion. Inclusion allows us to look at not just ethnicity, but ethnicity is never on its own, right? Or race. It's always intersected with gender, social class, sexual orientation, religion, all of these different parts of our identity. So if we talk about inclusion rather than racism, for example, it allows us to see people more in a holistic way. So that's one of my messages. The other one is we talk a lot about legislation and policies, but to me, it's not just that. That only will get you so far. It's also how do we relate to difference? What brings us? What do we all have in common as human beings around how we separate one from the other? And I feel like in the discourse right now, there's so much an us versus them, the in versus out group, and I'd like us to move beyond that and to shift the paradigm to an us conversation and to a community conversation. So. So I think the discourse in the United States around race and ethnicity is a little bit different to Europe, because we've been talking about this for so long, and we have a vocabulary for it and places to really talk about it. And in Europe, we're still, I think, finding our voices in that space and trying to define what our vocabulary is to really speak about it and to break through the taboo of speaking about race and ethnicity. What we see in the United States, and something that I'm sure is happening in Europe to an extent too, is we try not to talk about racism. It's still a dirty word, right? It still makes people feel offended. And of course, when we say you're a racist, or this is racist, that is something that might feel uncomfortable to people, because no one wants to be a racist, or very few people do, and it's usually not intentional. So we sometimes think that the people who are the good people are those who aren't racist, who aren't biased, who aren't sexist, and then we have the people who are the bad people, who are racist, sexist, have biases. But that's not really what we want to focus on, because that's really actually not true. Most people are good people, or at least think that they are, or have the best intentions. Doesn't mean that they are intentions that work for everybody. I think in the US we're trying to break a little bit more through the paradigm of good versus bad, and say, okay, how do we as human beings function? How does our brain function? How do we perceive difference? And how do we engage with the world differently?